Hi, my name's Emily Parrott. I work for Africa Tech Festival, and today we are joined by Miriam Altman, who is the Commissioner for National Planning Commission of the South African Presidency. Thank you for joining, Miriam.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So just to start, could you tell us a little bit more about your role and what that involves?
Sure, and I have different hats actually. My involvement in AfricaCom this year is based on being a professor of 4IR practice at the University of Johannesburg, and there the Vice Chancellor, who is one of the he's also speaking at AfricaCom, and he's one of the leading, really a leading global artificial intelligence expert and Vice Chancellor of this university. So he's really been driving that across the university and bringing on people such as myself to really promote it. Then as a National Planning Commissioner, we do the long-range vision and holding government to account against that vision for the transformation of South Africa. And so I'm a commissioner on this body, which is located in the Presidency of South Africa.
Great. So you did actually release a report on digital readiness for the future quite recently. Could you just share a little bit more information on this?
Well, what I should say is that the report, we started with the idea of 4IR, and we came to the view that we should really be speaking in plain language about being ready for a digital future, which is as yet uncertain, but which we know we need to be responsive to, that the population's got to be ready for it, whatever comes. You know, if you don't have a digitally enabled population, then you're dead in the water, basically. And particularly in COVID, as I think digitization is accelerating, it becomes even more important, and you end up with this ever-growing divide between haves and have-nots. And it's a very big issue across the continent, including South Africa, but right across the continent.
So I guess what are some of the key strategies that you kind of pull out that can help enable digital inclusion, maybe in South Africa, but beyond across the continent?
Well, you know, there are actually a lot of common issues, even though South Africa is a more industrialized country than most other countries in the continent. The issues are quite common, because what you'll find is in South Africa, we can say half the population have access to the internet, but it's almost a meaningless statement, because you could say maybe 30% of the population actually have the kind of digital access that you and I have. It means if, you know, Emily, if you say, what proportion of the population has broadband? I would then pick up my phone and check it out. And you become digitally engaged in a whole range of ways. So that means 70% of the population don't have that kind of access to handsets, to affordable broadband. They could probably get broadband somewhere near them, but they really don't have that kind of access. I do a lot of leadership work with youth leaders, and like really switched on university track kids from lower income communities. And I can really see what happens, which is that even kids who are on track for computer science and engineering, they just don't have access to a smart device, a smartphone. They don't have access to broadband at will the way we do. And that's what you need. We need strategies more similar to what you find in a place like Vietnam. I won't even say China is probably a gold star, but you know, they tend to be an outlier. The reality is it has nothing to do with the level of per capita income, how developed the country is, because Vietnam has been doing this for at least a decade. In other words, they were ahead of South Africa on internet penetration in the home. They had 3 times the internet penetration in the home that South Africa had 10 years ago, with a fraction of the per capita income that South Africa has. What it means is it is not linked to your level of development, it is linked to your commitment. And then the issue is to look at countries that have done fantastic things, like in Rwanda. South Africa is starting to get there, where we design policies firstly to make sure that we have broadband everywhere, that it is affordable. You go to a place like Vietnam, it is so affordable and so accessible. It's beyond imagination. You know, everybody's online. Absolutely, everybody is online easily. That there are no taxes on handsets. That they're easily available, and the markets are are competitive, that there's a regulator that effectively knows what to do, that there is a government that can draw people online and provide government services based on where people are today. So in other words, if everybody's on a 2G phone, design services using USSD or that type of thing. That's what Rwanda did. So they got everybody to be able to access services online, no matter what your device is. So you never have to walk into a government office. Now, across Africa, what you find is that the distances, we don't have these dense environments the way that maybe Asia does. So it is specifically enabling in an African context with these long distances to be shortening the distance between service delivery, consumption, business, and people via digital enablement, and yet the penetration is poor.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So also on, I guess, who do you think is most responsible for this? You talk about tax and a lot around that. Is it kind of very much a public-private partnership, or is there a lot more that the kind of government level needs to be leading? See.
Look, there is no doubt that public-private partnerships have to be part of this thing. I think sometimes we feel that the private sector will do it because a lot of the mobile rollout happened that way. But if you leave it to the private sector, what you'll find is what you find now, which is there are some people who are incredibly well served, and then the majority of people, just sort of have mobile access. That's basically what it is. So the need to be strengthening public-private partnerships, strengthening particularly the wholesale provision, the provision of wholesale telecommunications services more effectively, better thinking around that, stronger regulation, and stronger public-private partnerships are absolutely going to be key. One of the reasons for that is that you'll find that around the world, governments tend to not be very familiar with digital, anything to do with digital. Even when you look at the Facebook hearings in the US Senate, it was so interesting to see how backward even they were in terms of their understanding of privacy issues, digital, telecommunications, anything to do with these huge, the Googles and the Facebooks and so on. They don't know how to deal with them. And part of the problem is that digital is something new, it changes constantly, and government, just by its nature, tends to be a bureaucracy. It's a big bureaucracy, it's slow moving. And you'll find that that is like chalk and cheese. Nevertheless, we have to figure out how to square those two. When we put out our report, we got a lot of comment. We had a draft report as the NPC, and we're about to issue a final report. And in the interim, we got comments. And a good deal of the comments focused on how to strengthen the capacity of the state to be able to respond to this fast-moving environment. When you think about 5G, it may sound very abstract in this environment, but the reality is what an opportunity. Machine to machine, IoT, 5G, one can say, well, that's for rich countries, but why should it be? There's absolutely no reason why it should be. That's a mindset. So we definitely need state institutions that can grab hold of that. We could also be bringing down the cost of public service delivery and therefore improving lives of citizens by improving the capacity of the state to draw people online, to enable people to apply for services online, to have digital IDs and digital information that cross-cuts the various services. Obviously, privacy, much stronger capability around privacy, which maybe only the Europeans have managed to get their head around or have started to apply themselves to, but I don't see that anywhere else in the world. This is a choice. And this is where, we're having a session at AfricaCom around digital services to enable tracking and tracing around COVID. And what many countries have done is they've started locking into a Google, Apple, the cooperation that Google and Apple have done to come together to bring Android and iOS together as a platform so that you don't have central repositories of information, but rather that it's on your phone. Now, nobody would have thought that that would be the answer to privacy right? Nobody would have thought that those two companies would come together. But I think they saw the writing on the wall and thought, look, we better bite the bullet, come together. And more countries like South Africa, Canada, Ireland, a range of countries have now come on board to be using this partnership where government cooperates with this service. It's really a huge, it's like a sea change.
Yeah, definitely. It's huge. And I guess there's so much around building trust, not only, I guess, between companies, but building trust around, globally around the use of data and collecting and processing it, especially in COVID, where, the need for data is so pressing. Aside from, the future of the world and IoT and everything else, 5G and everything that goes, the kind of the conversations happening there. So I think a question I have then is, how do you kind of build a trusting environment around data access and transparency?
Well, it comes to a point where, and this has to be the role of government or independent bodies, but not the private sector. And that is not an anti-private sector statement. It is simply a reality that there needs to be public protection, growing sophistication, potentially the role of NGOs in ensuring that this happens. But there has to be a commitment. And as I say, I think that this Google-Apple cooperation is really something interesting, because that is the last thing that personally I thought was going to happen. I would have thought a central repository would be the thing, and then one protects it there. But the solution is moving towards these enormous companies that, frankly, where there isn't much trust, and understandably so. So these companies, I think that they start to, and you can see it in maybe a little bit of a growing humility amongst the Facebooks. When you see Mark Zuckerberg, he's a little bit less arrogant than he was. There's a whole attitude in this sector of, we don't really like government, we can do it without it, but you know what, hey, this is a very regulated industry. When I was chief of strategy at Telkom, which is South Africa's fixed line incumbent, that was a big culture change that I had to work on there, to get people to understand that a good relationship with government and with a regulator is incredibly important. And government's a big customer also, is incredibly important. But there's a kind of attitude to government, which is, we don't need you, and you really do, because they can slice you at your knees. So I think that they're starting to see that, and they're going to start to lift the sophistication and shift the attitude a little bit. And in fact, what they should be doing, Vodacom has been very good at stuff like this, of supporting specific services that would raise the sophistication. It is in their interest to have stronger government and more sophisticated regulation and government. And right now, I can say in South Africa anyway, and I would say across Africa, the sophistication of regulation is very poor, and really needs to be lifted up, even on the traditional stuff. For example, we haven't even migrated our broadcasting spectrum, the sub-gig spectrum. Just as an example, we're 5 years over the deadline now. So when we say we need to hand out spectrum to improve our mobile services, which spectrum?
Yeah. Great. So that does link to your session on Wednesday, which focuses on the Connecting the Next Billion. So I guess I'd just be interested to know what you think the kind of Connecting the Next Billion means for Africa specifically.
Well, the funny thing about that expression, what I should first say is, the former Minister of Telecommunications of Rwanda said to me, because he's in the session today, and he said to me he doesn't like the expression connecting the next billion. He said we should be connecting everybody. But it's a great expression for Africa because there are about 1 billion people. So what it means is, we're saying we want to connect everybody. When we say we want to connect the next billion, what we're saying is we want to connect everybody in Africa, which is the right way to see this, right? Now, then the question is, well, how do you get to scale? That is always the question. And how do you create the commercial basis? What is the role of government within that? And you know what, that is a multi-billion-dollar question. But many of the things that I've just mentioned around the role of government, regulation, and public-private partnerships are critical. But then there's the question of innovations. For example, in South Africa, we like to roll out fiber by digging trenches. Why don't we throw it over a pole? You know, what are the innovations that will enable this to go better? There's a view that that village networks will work. I don't know, will village networks be better than having 3 operators that roll out with better government control? Who would, how will you have accountability at a village level for, if one is rolling out with village networks? So, so the question's going to be, what are going to be the methods? Can we be a little bit more innovative? In some cases, it's not actually about availability of a network, but access to it and services, and finding products and services that to reach poor people and design specifically for low-income communities. That's where a company like MTN has been very strong in designing these kinds of services. And government's going to have to come in and help. Now, the problem is that in some African countries, government's not that strong and not that present. So then you've really got a big issue as to how you get rollout.
Yeah, definitely. And so I guess alongside that, what other sessions, because I know you're going to be doing a keynote and you've changed them to a panel discussion. So it'd just be interesting to kind of maybe talk about a little bit the reasoning for that and what you want the audience to hopefully gain from this.
Okay, so I was supposed to give a keynote address today, and I decided that I thought it would be more interesting in this environment to have people who are at the coalface of developing, the leaders involved in developing some of the digital applications that are going to enable us to open safely. Because the critical thing, I convene a group of economists that are dealing with coming up with economic solutions for dealing with this period. And the most critical thing that we can absolutely do is not even an economic intervention. It's to make sure that we are implementing track and trace, physical distancing, that type of thing, that we're implementing these ability to do early warning systems and information sharing, quarantining, and distancing, masks and all that, sanitizing. And I find that economic actors, from government to the private sector, they know it's important, but they're not taking hold of it as the most highest priority. So what we're doing today, there's 2 groups of people that will be talking. The first is a group that's leading COVID Connect and COVID Alert. Those are the apps that have been adopted by the Department of Health in South Africa. And one is based on geolocation technology, and the other one is based on Bluetooth. Now, the critical thing about Bluetooth, and that is the iOS, that's the Apple Google service that was developed in the EU and is gaining traction globally. The benefit of that is that you don't know where someone was, and you don't know who that was, and you don't have to provide names. You just have to know that your phones were in proximity. So now that is very interesting. So what we have is we have the leader in the Department of Health, the person who's managing all of this and leading the whole initiative. We have Discovery Health, which is the company that was actually stimulating it behind the scenes since about March. Pray, which is an NGO developing the technology, govchat.org, which is an emerging service that is going to be enabling the ability to apply for government services online, registration for grants, feedback loops on government services. So COVID's given it impetus. So that group of people will be talking about how they've worked together to do that. And that partnership is very important. The second group of people is Paul Mayer, who's CEO of GovNet and the former Minister of Telecommunications from Rwanda. They work together. And they have launched a service called Common Pass. And it's based, Paul has launched an NGO, a global NGO called the Commons Project. And the concept is, we were speaking earlier about the idea of who is going to regulate. Who does the domains globally? Is it government, private sector, or something in between? So he's developing something in between. And Common Pass is meant to be something, it's not private, it's not public, it's in between. And the idea is to create a global service that enables people to move seamlessly across borders. Now, we can call it an immunity passport, but it's not quite that, because it's not really like a yellow immunization, because it's a moment in time. You do a test, it's good for a couple days, then it's over, but at least you went to an accredited clinic, lab, even if it was in Urdu or Arabic or English or whatever, but we know it was legitimate. You did your test, you can cross the border, finished. A lot of people don't like this immunity passport idea because they're not sure how long it lasts, but they missed the point that this is just to get you across the border without lots of rigmarole and fake. Somebody can just print something out, something that accredits and gives faith that it's working. So what they're doing is they're doing a pilot right now that is being monitored by CDC between major airports, working with Cathay Pacific and I think it's United Airlines, between New York, London, Hong Kong, Singapore. It may be that it's not going ahead, I'm not sure, because of the recent lockdowns, but that's the idea. And so they've launched that, and they're doing a pilot between those destinations to see how it goes. And so they'll be talking about it. Now, one of the things I wanted to do is, number one, I wanted to show the power of partnerships, because that's the only way to go to scale. It's not about a cool app. It's about the big systems being able to take it on, take it to scale, and then continuous learning. So we are where we are now. And then what we need to talk about is, where do we go from here? Right? It's not about what's today. It's about that you're in motion. So I want to show partnerships, continuous learning, and I want people to know that there's real people behind these. This is who they are. Let's hear from them. Let's ask some questions, because this feels very black boxish. People feel this is a period of profound disempowerment and alienation. And so I thought it would be something very powerful to say, here's the guy at the Department of Health. String a sentence together and explain very intelligently what he's doing and what he's planning to do. And you can ask him questions and he'll answer. I think in this period, that is something very powerful. So that's why I repurposed the session. And I hope people will listen to it. And because we're online this year, we're going to record it. So it will be available. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my website, and I have two websites, which I can give you the address for, where I'm going to post information about these so people can watch the video, but also get other kinds of information to understand it. Shall I give you the websites?
Yes, please. That would be brilliant.
Okay. So the two websites, I have a COVID website. It's COVID-19 economicideas.org. COVID-19 economicideas.org. That's the one. The second one is just my name. It's miriamaltman.com. So that information will be available on both websites. And I'll just keep updating it. I'll try to. So I would welcome people to check those out and see how the information's evolving, because I really do hope that it will evolve, actually. I think it will.
Definitely, that's really interesting. Thank you. And of course, the presentations are going to be on demand for 90 days on the platform, and then we will host them separately so that you can catch up and watch them. So Miriam, how are you finding the event so far? It's a shame we're not in Cape Town, obviously, yeah. But how are you finding it so far?
Well, no, it's great. I think it's great that you continue to be online. It's amazing to me that I've had a number of experiences where I've been invited to tech sessions, and then they say, oh no, it's canceled. And I think, why don't you just go online? Especially if it's a tech event. So I think it's very ambitious, and congratulations for doing it this way. It might mean that we can do it more often, or that we can connect better. The downside, of course, is that, WorkAtCom is connecting with people. But, this is the period we're in. So congratulations to you guys for getting this together, and well done.
Thank you. And I hope you have some really interesting conversations during your discussions and any Q&As you are part of. But yeah, thank you so much for joining, Miriam. I'll let you enjoy the rest of the event. Enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks. Bye.